Good day to you. Blessings. This is chapter 6, a reading from chapter 6 of the book This Is It by Dr. Joseph Murphy, a book that was printed. The copyright edition I have is from the year 1948, the third edition of the book. And so I'm reading chapter 6. There have been 5 chapters we read previously. Some of them were divided into 2, some of them just one reading. They are from 10 to 20 minutes long, and so hopefully you've listened to the previous ones. Chapter 6 is entitled Hearing and Seeing. Now, I encourage you to get the book. These are just readings of the book. Get the book and then just think about what he is saying. Let your mind just, as he reads, as you read it, consider the ideas that he's putting forth. Let your mind wrestle with them, if you will. The text that he is using. He's using the Bible, speaking of the Bible, and really interpreting the Bible from a figurative standpoint, a allegorical standpoint, psychological standpoint, is the way that he's using the Bible. In other words, he's seeking to make the Bible something that affects and brings about an effect, and saying to the human that the human is the cause of what is taking place in his or her life. He is also speaking of the mind as having 2 phases. PHASE, 2 phases, and the one mind having 2 phases. They are the subjective and the objective. The objective, as we talked about previously in the previous chapter, reasons, is logical, is sequential in its thinking, step by step by step. The subjective mind is creative. It is deductive. It is pattern seeking. And it goes about its own process. It is able to create. It is that which is called the Father within us. And so there's a process that he's talking about there, which is a marvelous process when one is seeking to bring about different results that they've not brought about previously. So we're continuing here with chapter 6 of the book. This is it. Every day of our lives, we are only meeting our beliefs. Let us not be fooled, cajoled, or tricked by any seemingly miraculous stories or strange phenomena. Many so-called strange occurrences, projections, and voices are nothing but subjective manifestations. The ghosts we fear are those that walk the gloomy galleries of our minds. To the intuitive or sensitive person, the subjective or subconscious is an open book. He reveals the contents of his subconscious to your conscious or awakened self. The thoughts and feelings of man can also be read by a deck of cards, sand, or other devices. From time immemorial, man has given certain values to cards and other symbols. Since man has given authority and power to these things, they must confirm his belief symbolically. By getting into a partly subjective or passive state, it is possible to reveal the contents of the subjective mind of a person. The cards or the marks on the sand serve as an alphabet which, when pierced together intuitively, give a language that will be understood. We are surprised many times that what is delineated is true, and many of the predictions do occur. To read the character of any individual, it must be done intuitively or in a partially subjective state. If a person is highly intuitive, he tunes in with you and reveals the contents of your subjective mind. Your conscious mind becomes aware of what you formerly were not aware. As long as a man worships at the shrine of graven images and molten idols, so long will he be a slave to his beliefs. Like this surge of the sea, he will be tossed to and fro, a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. I will mention here that there's a saying by Carl Jung where he says that the cave that we fear to enter is the one that will keep us captive. And things will happen to us, and we will call it fate, F-A-T-E, as if it was inevitable that those things will happen. And so this is what is being talked about here. This is kind of like that cave that he is speaking about. And so that's what is being said here. But continuing with the reading. What Isaiah or the prophet of God says is only too true. Thou art wearied in the multitude of thy counsel. Isaiah 47, verse 13. He is looking for a God outside of himself. He is worshiping constantly at the shrine of the false gods. Whatever man accepts as true becomes a subjective reality. The subconscious mind of man, being absolutely impersonal, no respecter of persons, and non-selective, accepts whatever man believes to be true and gives it form. The latter becomes an embodiment, an experience, or condition in that man's world. Now you understand that man, used here, is generative. That means that it's speaking of both men and women. Continuing. He is impressed by a suggestion that he will have an accident on the 15th of the month, and that he should avoid auto travel or train travel. That man lives in fear until the 15th. Then he decides to lock himself in a room. Having impressed his subconscious with the belief in an accident, and having actuated it by fear, he knows it now must come to pass. He cannot escape. Something happens, he slips in the bathroom and hurts himself, or he cuts his hand with a knife. Perhaps a fire breaks out. Something must happen. Now, if man knows the law of life and the truth of being, that I and my Father are one, and that whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing, ye shall receive, Matthew 21:22, this man will shape and mold his own destiny. He will laugh at all dire predictions because he knows his consciousness to be God. What he feels as true of himself must come to pass. Not liking what he has heard, he says to himself, how would I feel were the opposite true? Then he enters into the spirit of it, gets into the mood that all things are possible to him who believes, enters into the conviction that it is so, and thrills to it. This man has actualized a new state subjectively, and this must come to pass. If a man believes that he must get hay fever this year, as he always has in the past, let him dispel all such beliefs in powers apart from himself. Let him turn his attention to God within. Yes, turn inward toward the real. This is internalization of consciousness. In this state, let the person dwell in the feeling of perfect health. Enter into the spirit or mood of being healed, and he will express health. God is truly the known God, as Paul says, if haply they might feel after him and find him. Yes, all that man has to do is enter into the feeling of the answered prayer. His eyes, ears, and all his faculties will be turned inward and focused on the one, the beautiful, and the good. While man is still in this meditative and relaxed mood, he will write on his consciousness the words of Scripture, it is finished. We must walk the earth knowing and believing perfect health is ours. There's absolutely no one who can predict with accuracy for the spiritual man. or the man who dies daily through scientific prayer. It cannot be done because this man predicts for himself. The mystic sees the fallacy of fear of the unknown and belief in evil. The mystic, the truth student who believes in God as taught in the Bible and prays scientifically to the God within himself, is a true prophet. Truly, he prophesies for himself all the good that is to come. He is the master of his faith and the captain of his soul. He knows that God shall wipe away all tears and that there shall be no more crying. When man awakens to the truth, he realizes that Christ is his consciousness. Then he recognizes the great oneness wherein all men are one. Moreover, he knows and understands the meaning of the greatest commandment. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. Mark 12, verse 29. What such a man feels as true of himself, he feels as true of the other. He only sees and feels the good for every living creature. Such a man is a type of Christ and is capable of seeing or hearing only good for all people. He knows that negative feelings toward another disturb the harmony of the whole or oneness of which he is a part. The whole of God is in the part, for consciousness cannot be divided. And all mine are thine, and thine are mine, and I am glorified in them, said Jesus the Christ in John 17, verse 10. And for their sakes I sanctify myself, that they also might be sanctified through the truth, John 17, 19. The true prophet or mystic enters into the mood or feeling of the answered prayer. He has the feeling that it is done, and closing his eyes and ears to the world, he comes before his presence with the singing. He enters into his gates with thanksgiving and into his courts with praise. Contemplating the reality of the wish fulfilled, he rests. This is a Sabbath or rest of the Lord, or the rest of the law. By sanctifying himself, he makes others whole. The mystic walks the earth unmoved, unchallenged, and unshaken in his conviction that his feeling, thy will be done, must be manifest. In a little while, perhaps he is still speaking. It appears. The divine message, the divine image, becomes visible on the world's screen. For the first time, he becomes consciously aware of it. He has looked within and not without and found the wisdom, the power, and the glory. Man does not believe that it is possible for him to extend his faculties of sight so that he may actually see, for example, one of his loved ones thousands of miles away and carry on a conversation as if they had met on the street. Neither does the average so-called wise person of the world believe it possible to carry on a conversation at a distance of thousands of miles without the aid of the well-known mechanical inventions for this purpose. In the chapter on time and space, it outlined the remarkable ability of an Indian boy to stop the flow of blood. This same young man, in addition, had the amazing capacity of projecting his voice thousands of miles to Colorado. He did this quietly, and at the same time, replies came back through the air in the voice of his brother. It was just as if two people sat in their living room chairs and conversed. This is how he did it. He would sit down, close his eyes, and begin to talk to his brother, named Two Moons. The conversation concerned family ties, health of the mother, death of some friends, and local news. All of his comrades thought he was faking. Some accused him of being a ventriloquist and said they could prove it. He decided to take them up on their word or their questions, and he asked them to ask 3 questions rapidly, which would require a fairly lengthy reply. They stuffed his mouth with a handkerchief and sealed his lips with adhesive tape. The answers came clearly over the air. Their answers were heard by many persons present, many men present, including the author, Dr. Murphy. After the lapse of a few minutes, his brother in Colorado said, "Why don't you reply?" In answering, he had asked him a question regarding a dog named Senko. No answer could be given as it was physically impossible for him to open his mouth. To sum it up, this Indian boy believed that he could talk and be heard at a distance only by his brother and father. This was a childhood conditioning based upon belief. If he could project his voice thousands of miles over mountains through fog, wind, and waves, certainly he could also be able to project his vision and actually see his brother. He could not do that since he had been informed when he was a boy that he could. His father believed that he, the firstborn in their family, could talk over distances to male members of the family only, and that their replies would be heard. Yet his brother did not have the power, according to him, of initiating conversation. This may all seem peculiar and somewhat weird, but it shows in a striking manner what belief can do. If we could believe now, if we would believe now that we could walk on water, we could do so. Most of us would like to believe or want to believe. However, we do not really believe we could, simply because our mother and our teacher said this is impossible. Now it is a fixed belief in our subjective mind. The storms at sea, the tempests, the cyclones, the hurricanes are within man, within a person, him or herself. When we are truly at peace, others will say, "What manner of person is this, that even the winds and the seas obey him?" Matthew 8, verse 27. Matthew 8, verse 27. That's from the book entitled "This Is It" by Dr. Joseph Murphy. That's the end of this reading for chapter 6 of this book. I bid you adieu. Namaste. God bless you. Continue to bless you and keep you. Take care. Bye-bye.